My name is Frank Zerunyan. I'm a professor of the practice of governance at the University of Southern California, USC Price School of Public Policy. I'm also director of our executive education and of our ROTC military programs. Delighted to have you all virtually in this program. I thank our staff, our development staff, for putting all this together. They've done a terrific job, and we've been able to get our voice out to our communities that we all serve. My doctorate is in law. I'm trained as a lawyer. I served as a mayor and council member for over 17 years, and I've served as a gubernatorial appointee during the Schwarzenegger administration for the medical board. I teach both in our undergraduate as well as graduate programs at USC Price School, and of course teach globally as well. The challenge I have now is, of course, have a topic that is larger than life to cover in about 15 minutes and allow you to ask questions. And Harley will, of course, take all those questions down, and I'll answer as many questions as possible. To understand how local governments deal with the pandemic in our communities, we must first understand how our local governments are framed both constitutionally and legally. I've gotten a lot of questions over this pandemic about the power issue of governments and whether or not governments can do what they are doing currently, for example. So I intend to talk about the Constitution, the law, specifically California law, and then focus on what local governments are doing, can do, and what to expect perhaps in these 15 minutes. First, constitutionally, as most of you probably are aware, our federal constitution does not even have a word about cities or municipalities. That does not mean the founders did not intend a decentralized form of government. They did. And they actually passed on all those powers to the states, to the people, through the states. And that's, of course, in the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment. Therefore, each state was able to write its own laws about their levels of governments within their own states. Hence, we find, for example, the legal structure for a city or a county in our context in the California Constitution, Article 11, and specifically for cities, Section 3 and 5 for charter law cities, and Section 7 for general law cities, which actually is the police power of the cities that I will allude to as I talk about this. I also want you to know my bias. I am extremely biased towards a very localized form of government. I know there are many of my colleagues on this call, mayors and council members, dear friends of mine, and they all know that I believe firmly that the most effective and efficient form of government is the one that is closest to the people that it serves. That's my bias, and that's another topic in and of itself. And I've written about that in a Fordham Urban Law Journal article a couple of years ago, but I wanted to get that out for sure. So how are we doing during this pandemic as far as how we're asking people to stay home, for example, and is that okay? Well, the United States Supreme Court has said that police powers utilized at the local level is okay. And we've used these police powers quite a bit, various times for various different major calamities, including obviously this one. These powers are triggered as a result of a declaration of emergency, which at this level, at this point, as you know, almost every level of government has declared an emergency, which allows each level of government to talk to each other, whether it's for supplies, money, or anything else that might be possible. In California, however, in addition to all of that, we are well codified in this topic. We have an act called the Communicable Disease Prevention and Control Act, which actually controls pandemics of this type and allows the state and state agencies to isolate or quarantine people. The language of the statute, however, says necessary for the protection of public health and the public purpose. I'm going to come back to this notion as I conclude, because there are real, very important legal issues that may face us soon in local governments coming up. Other states have similar laws on their books, dealing with, of course, the balancing of what we're attempting to balance today, which is clearly constitutional rights and, of course, public interest and public health. This becomes a relatively interesting issue, and I'll come back to it in a few minutes. Counties, in the context of what the state is, are an instrumentality of the state under our Constitution in California. In other words, they administer, for example, criminal justice, voting, public health and welfare, which is relevant here in the COVID-19 world, the recording of documents, weights and measures, etc. So counties really participate to state work in doing some of these things, and of course, public health. My city of Rolling Hills Estates, where I serve as a council member, for example, and I've served as a 3-term mayor, has to adhere to the requirements of public health at the county level because we don't have our own public health department, which is true for most of you on this call that are council members and mayors in various cities. While cities have broader, actually, believe it or not, powers and more independence, but we do not have these health and safety powers, for example, that the counties have. So currently, most of our cities are abiding by the county stay-at-home orders because that's where we are, and each county is responsible for that. My city, of course, being in LA County dictates, of course, how we conduct ourselves. That being said, we can, as cities, can certainly require more than what the county requirements are, but technically under law, we can't require less. The primary responsibility of the cities here are, especially in crises, is a support through collaboration. Now, I teach governance, I teach collaboration. This is one of my topics that I teach actually worldwide. And the importance of collaboration in a pandemic like this is extremely important, as we must, as local governments, collaborate with our county governments, our sister cities, so to speak, in the county. And this is, by the way, is happening as we speak. Mayor Garcetti has been quite a leader in this topic, has a weekly calls with all of the cities of the County of Los Angeles in particular. There are 88 cities in the entire county. And I know that all of the mayors participate to this safer at home concept and discussion of what will be next, so to speak. What is also important for us is to collaborate with some of our very important governance partners. And those include our utilities, for example. Our utilities face a major challenge, especially in times like this, where we're doing this via Zoom, for example, and electricity, as well as other means such as broadband, is extremely important to what we're doing in this pandemic. So we need to work with them, and we need to make their job easier for them. Our trash haulers, I suspect all of your trash is being picked up, as mine is. Trash haulers are doing a great job, although they have their own challenges with respect to safety measures, safe distance, social distancing, for example. So for a while, as I understand, some of the laws on trash and recycling are going to be suspended in order to be able to allow the trash haulers the ability to do the first most important thing, which is to pick up our trash. Establishing and maintaining contact with major stakeholders, labor in your cities, for example. chambers of commerce, organizations that deal with seniors in particular, the most vulnerable here in this pandemic, are the responsibility of our local governments. And most importantly, of course, our citizens, the people who live in our communities for whom we serve. We are public servants and we serve them. They're our boss. And it's time for us to be able to do what is necessary, and that is to educate. I encourage all of my colleagues on the call that are on local governments in particular, have an extensive campaign on social media and otherwise to inform your residents on a daily basis what's happening. The problem has been with this pandemic, unfortunately, and I'm not going to point fingers anywhere, but the level of fear has been substantially more than other times. And people fear what they don't know. So informing your residents on a regular basis with information that you're potentially armed by our state, by our county, by our professionals, the scientific world, and some of the great work that our scientists are doing. If I may mention one of my dear colleagues and friend, Niraj Sood, who actually is doing a lot of good work in this domain about testing people. The more testing we get, the more we're going to get our arms around the issues of controlling this pandemic and making sure that we get back to as possible normalcy as we can. I want to kind of now come to the conclusion here before I allow you to ask questions here by talking about what I said that I would about our Constitution and our laws, and what I'm seeing happen and what I will see more happening in our communities. So perhaps I'm warning you that this may happen. Expect lawsuits. You are going to see more constitutional challenges to some of these stay-at-home orders as time goes by. These challenges now, I think, are pretty safe under current law. Again, in my opinion, I think we are in a framework of our police powers and our powers that are allowed to us by law. But as time goes by, and as time goes where the public necessity diminishes based on scientific facts and data, for example, the decline of the virus, the decline of the mortality rates, for example, increase in testing. We're going to find out more people have this virus. My colleague, of course, said this all along in an article that he wrote across the nation, that he was convinced that more people were inflicted by this. And that is, I think, proving to be right. So in other words, more science ultimately may make this pandemic a reasonable health risk as we take with other health risks, in which case, of course, the law is going to step in and the balancing act is going to start occurring about civil liberties, the Constitution, and religious freedom, a constitutional right to assemble, as well as one topic that some of my few colleagues are speaking about, and I've seen from few other law schools talking about the topic of taking, for example. Constitutionally, as you well know, government cannot take private property without just compensation. Ultimately, we may get there. In other words, if we don't find a way of getting back to a level of normalcy in taking reasonable risks in the healthcare domain, so to speak, some folks are going to make the argument that stay at home actually takes the private property away without just compensation. These are theories that might develop. They're extremely fact intensive. I'm not suggesting that they're going to be there, but please watch for these, and it may happen as we get through. But I'm confident that most governments are coming up with various models to reopen, various models safely to reopen, and diminishing those risks both from a health perspective as well as a legal perspective. My time is up. I'm going to stop right here because 15 minutes on the dot, and I'm going to turn to Harley for questions. Thank you very much.
So the first question is actually coming to us from our Facebook live stream. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that citizens have in regard to how they think local governments should act? What powers local governments generally have?
Well, I'll go back to what I said about our police powers. The Constitution of California gives us, in California in particular, Article 11, Section 7, which most general cities, by the way, govern under. And again, if you're interested, feel free to read my Fordham Urban Law Journal article. I talk more about this in that article. But you clearly have these powers to that come down from the constitutional setting to be able to protect the public health, generally speaking. And I presume you're doing that if you're in the county of LA and you're following county orders of stay at home and you're trying to educate your community as much as you can, that this is for the good or for the public good, and that's what needs to remain.
Okay. One of our participants wanted us to remind folks that not all safer at home is not safe for all, that if you do experience any domestic or sexual violence or child maltreatment, to please seek emergency help.
Thank you for that. Harley, I want to comment on that. It's not that I completely understand. In fact, I was talking to a dear colleague of mine, another mayor from another city a few minutes ago. Apparently there's a spike in her community of domestic violence, and my heart goes out, of course. And please, by all means, just because we're staying at home does not mean that we forget about criminal law or any other behavior that is criminal. And by all means, do call your local law enforcement agencies if you face that issue.
Okay. So now we are getting a flux of questions, so I'm going to just start going through the list. And apologies in advance if we don't go through all of them. I will do my best. Thank you for sending them in. The next question is, any input on the utilities raising rates during this emergency period? SCE has put in place a 6% increase at this time. SoCal Gas has an increased plan for government and commercial accounts scheduled May 1st, which they have put on hold, with plans to seek repayment from customers next year.
I'm not aware of any particular rate increases at the present time. I believe there were a number of rate increases, if I'm not mistaken, that went to the CPUC some time ago. Maybe the questioner is asking about those. Those have been around, but I'm not aware of any particular ones that are going on right now as we speak. That's probably a better question for our utility partners to ask.
Okay. The next question is, please share your opinion about withholding of federal assistance and allowing states to go bankrupt.
Well, first off, the notion of states going bankrupt is a false notion. Unless we amend the United States Bankruptcy Code, states cannot go bankrupt under Chapter 9 of the Bankruptcy Code. That is reserved only for municipalities. So the notion of states going bankrupt does not exist. And for municipalities, Chapter 9 is called Municipal Debt Adjustment for a reason. In other words, they're not necessarily discharging of debts. It is a municipal debt adjustment. So that kind of, I view that to be more political rhetoric than legal rhetoric, to be honest. In the law, that's very difficult to accomplish.
Okay. The next question is, what are your thoughts as to slowly reopening cities, example, small businesses, parks, etc.?
So that's a great question. My first reaction to that is safely. We should do that safely. But if I may write into the question a little bit, and even though it wasn't there, but perhaps the questioner is referring to the kind of one-size-fits-all approach that we currently have to the pandemic in all cities, all counties. For example, there's 6 rural counties today that have been asking the governor to relax their county because they're not seeing these numbers at all. They're rural counties. They're different than most urban counties. I suspect some of our cities feel the same way. Now, my advice is, and as I'm doing in my own city, is to work with your board of supervisor, to work with your supervisor, to see to it that you put in place various measures that would mitigate any kind of danger. For example, a store may have a door with a buzzer, for example, right? The store can put a sign on the door and say, we serve one customer at a time, for example. That would be a safe mitigation measures that may allow that business owner to operate. So there may be other examples like this, but my advice is work with your supervisor to find ways of, follow the science, make it safely. Your city may not experiencing a very heavy dose. Thankfully, my city is not, for example. We only have had 13 known COVID cases in my city, none dangerous. So again, but still, we are a family in the county. This disease does not know city borders. We need to act within the county context and then regional context. I serve at SCAG as well, and we have 6 counties, and the counties also need to act responsibly and put mitigation measures if they are going to open up some businesses.
Our next question is from Facebook Live. How do local officials handle the request of free mortgage and free rent?
Well, unfortunately, those are private issues. I'm not sure that I, as a city council member, can go to a private owner. I can ask, but I can't dictate that, obviously. So those are private issues. They need to be dealt with private folks. Now, if there are any cities with ordinances that affect that topic, then I presume you can act on your ordinances. But cities who do not have such ordinances, that would be a private issue.
Next question is, how can local governments leverage public-private partnerships and other forms of collaboration to help K through 12 students in marginalized communities go back to school?
Well, I don't know who's asking that question, but public-private partnerships is a topic I write on. I have a book chapter on the topic, and I love the topic. I teach the topic. So I'm very big on that as well, because I don't think in the 21st century world of governance, government can accomplish everything that we need to accomplish to serve our constituencies well. And there are opportunities in the private sector, but smart opportunities, I might add, understanding the motivation of each sector and working with the motivation of each sector to be able to enter into public-private partnerships. I encourage it, but again, the responsibility lies with the government sector to protect its citizenry and ask the right question, find the right partner. Not every entity out there is a good partner in the private sector for local governments, but we can certainly look for the private sector to provide a bunch of things for us to govern better, no question.
Is there anything Los Angeles County and the city could do to better prepare for an unexpected spike?
You should ask that question to healthcare folks or my colleague Niraj, because I'm not in that part. From a governance standpoint, to be honest, we're learning. I know that perhaps it's not out there too much, but I assure you that my colleagues in local governments are working around the clock to learn and to be able to respond to this, and any spike for that matter, in a way that this has taught us that in some instances, of course, we didn't expect.
What do you see as a timeline for cities to get back to some sort of normalcy?
Well, I have a personal opinion based on what I'm reading. By all means, I would defer to the scientists and statistician on this topic. But in my judgment, certainly from a legal perspective as well, where I'm going to be concerned about a bunch of lawsuits piling up, I would say that the timelines that I'm seeing already, various governors speak, including our own governor speak, which takes us well into summer, is probably a reasonable timeline. I've always said to my friends that I see this being end of June, early July kind of timeline. Don't expect, by the way, complete normalcy. That's not going to happen anytime soon. Expect mitigation expect another way of dealing with this, but certainly expecting people going back to work, I think, is a crucial element of our health and mental health, as well as governance, so to speak. So I would say midsummer-ish in my personal judgment.
I'm going to try to get through a few more questions, but please know that we are keeping these questions. We will be happy to answer them after the event. This video will be live on our website, as well as any articles that Frank mentioned during his talk. So the next question, you mentioned the importance of the regular dissemination of information. When we hear from our county officials that the number of cases is X, but our nurses on the front line report that the cases are X plus Y, it makes me wonder who to believe. Are there any legal requirements across communities for consistency in this type of reporting?
Well, you know, I caution people on anecdotal evidence, right? I mean, I understand, and I'm not saying anything about the value of a doctor or a nurse in a particular hospital or in a particular ER versus, you know, a larger organization that is collecting information. I have no reason to doubt my county and my county officials, frankly, and I don't want to get into any kind of who's right and who's wrong argument. I would listen to all of them, frankly, and do the best I can for my community.
This next question is from Council Member Carla Thornton, joining us on our Facebook live stream. What is your opinion on the numerous executive orders coming out of the governor's office that are directly impacting local cities where communication and logistical support is lacking? An example is the recent meal delivery program for seniors that was announced. How do we manage these executive orders?
So, look, governor is trying to do his best. I mean, it's not an easy job. And today he had another one. I think he's trying to match our agricultural organizations with food banks, because food is spoiling, unfortunately, because even though it looks like the demand is there and that, you know, but unfortunately, apparently, according to him, food is spoiling, and he's trying to connect them to food bank. We're going to have to do our best. Look, we're going to have to get most information we can from the state and the county and disseminate that information as quickly as possible to our communities. Let's not forget our responsibility at the local level. That's why I said that your staff at the local level needs to be very proactive. I must say I'm proud of my staff in Rolling Hills Estates, who does a very, very good job on a daily basis to get information out and to interact with various organizations in the community. Everyone has a job to do here. You got to lead and tap them to help you get the information out. We can't point fingers in this pandemic and whose problem it is, whose problem it is not. Us at the local level, our responsibility is to get our constituency as educated as possible. Let's do it.
Okay, and then we'll do one more question. If a relapse occurs after restrictions are eased in a state, what level of government is responsible for reinstating tougher restrictions?
Well, I suspect at that point, if that were to occur, I'm not sure about that. Again, I'm not a scientist, but I believe that the more we test, the more we develop an immunity to this, I think the better off we are. But again, that being said, I believe you'll see all levels of government interact at that point as we're interacting right now. State, county, and local would interact in putting various measures in place that are responsive to the need of such a spike. But again, I'm hopeful that hypothetical would never occur. Also, information-wise, it depends what you call a spike. There are going to be more people. To me, that's not a spike. There's going to be more people who is going to be identified as COVID carriers or survivors. But that's the nature of the testing. In fact, we want to, right? So to me, that's not the issue. And then the more we test, the more we know, the morbidity rate will go down because we'll definitely. It's an equation, right? It's a math. It's a division. So I don't know what you mean by a spike, but hopefully we will not have a spike. And again, I'll defer to some of my colleagues in the health field on those topics. But we at the local level need to do everything we can to disseminate information as quickly as we can and protect our constituency as much as we can.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Frank, for doing this today. And thank you for all of our participants joining us. Please join us again tomorrow for another Price Talks, and make sure you check our website. We're adding new sessions every week. Thank you again, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.